Timothy P. Carney.
Matthew Welch, how's it going?
It's going well. How many Carneys are there in the journalism punditry business?
In my family, I've got two brothers. John is at CNBC and Brian's at the Wall Street Journal Europe. And then the rest are all liberals that are leaving journalism to go work for Joe Biden or something like that. So we don't count them.
The rest in your family, or
No,
the rest,
the rest
for the name?
the non-related ones.
Yeah. Who's the best of the three Carney brothers?
It depends.
No, I mean, who's the worst? Actually, that's
Brian's the smartest, but he just writes opinion stuff. Johnny's the best writer. I'm the hardest working though of all of them.
And obviously the best looking.
Sure.
Okay. That's a pointless enough segue to talk about the issue du jour, which is all the shady and awful, evil, foreign, possibly Chinese corporations who are, if I'm not mistaken, threatening to end democracy as we know it, according
Steal democracy was the word the DNC used.
Since you write about whatchamacallit, lobbying and corporate giving and corporatism and campaign donating or doning, give us a sense to begin with, maybe, of how vulnerable Obama actually is, or the administration writ large, to the same charges that they're that they're flinging these days towards U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other targets.
Well, to start with, the Chamber and Obama started off as buddies. They both were for the TARP bailout. They both were for the Detroit bailout. They both were for the $800 billion stimulus. And
where were they on the 2008 election, or did they get involved in presidential contests?
They did not do as big of an effort in 2008 as they did now to sort of do outside expenditures. Typically, the Chamber as an organization, when it comes to campaign activity, supports Republicans. That the percentage used to be overwhelmingly, and it went to sort of leaning Republicans. Also, though, its lobbying agenda, as you know, as anybody who's read any of my stuff knows, their lobbying agenda is mixed, and I basically classify it this way. When it comes to spending, and when it comes to spending, the Chamber is big government. When it comes to regulation, they tend to be free market. So they want their handouts, but they want hands off their own money. But I think the Chamber's lobbying activity is actually more free market than other groups, and some of these other groups are the ones that are generally supporting Democrats. The drug lobby, I was just looking at their financial filings for the third quarter. So this is, everybody knows the Republicans are going to have a good chance of taking the House. We're going to get lots of seats in the Senate. Lots of money that had been going to Democrats is swinging over to Republicans this time because a lot of times business goes with the winner. But the drug lobby, pharma, spent 62% of its money, its PAC money, on Democrats. So it really creates a complex issue that the media, I think, is incapable of discussing. That the Chamber is generally, almost a vast majority of the money it's spending is supporting Republican candidates. But other big business lobbies that spend almost as much as lobbying, but not as much on campaigns, tends to be supporting Obama and the Democrats.
Now, in the elections in 2008, for sure, Obama, and I presume the Democrats, and fill in where I'm getting it wrong, they got the most money, they got the most donors, and they got the most corporate donors, and I think also the most Wall Street donors.
We need to be careful about corporate donors, because there's three things that get measured when people talk about money from industries. First is just individuals within the industry giving money. On a large scale, I think that's relevant, even though, some guy might happen to be a cameraman for a movie studio and give $1,000 to a Republican. That doesn't mean Hollywood.
That's actually unlikely.
Well, I don't know cameramen in Hollywood. Yeah. I feel like the cameramen in D.C. in the press rooms are actually fairly conservative. But anyway, individual money is relevant, but not as telling as, say, PAC, Political Action Committee money. And then sort of direct corporate spending is very constrained. Recently, the Citizens United court decision, which Obama likes to attack, has freed up corporations to more directly spend on issue advocacy ads, where they're basically endorsing or attacking a candidate, but doing it kind of, behind the veil of just speaking out on issues. And so in 2008, there wasn't really corporate direct money. But when it came to how money was coming from individuals and industries, Obama raised more money from Wall Street than any politician in history, more money from the drug industry than any politician in history. I think he raised $1 million from individuals at Goldman Sachs. Goldman now actually has tacked to the Republicans more than the rest of Wall Street has. The rest of Wall Street is still favoring Democrats. Goldman, is through its PAC and its individuals, is now favoring Republicans. So, but Obama's whole, and this is most of what I've worked on for the last 2 years, his whole I'm battling the special interest stuff doesn't hold up. In 2008, the special interests favored him, and in 2010, the special interests are split.
And one of the ways that you get at that question, and it's accurate, is that in Obama's formulation, special interests don't include things like teachers' unions, which is ridiculous if you think about it. They are, they have much more of a direct kind of conflict with public policy, or at least, equivalent conflict with public policy than your Coke Industries type of person would do, because, this is how we're educating people, and they certainly had a huge effect on, let's say, the D.C. mayoral election here, where they spent $1 million to help unseat a bristly local mayor who's rubbing people the wrong way with a bunch of different things. But Obama leaves them out. Unions are not a special interest somehow, even though, in the state of California, where I'm from, they are far and away the biggest single actors.
And I think the point that you make, and in California, maybe you can make this with more, go deeper. The conflict, I always say special interest is something that's in conflict with, or at least divergent from, the public interest. And the public employee unions, and I include the teachers' unions, seem to me to be more clearly at odds with the public interest than the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce has members who, yes, they do have things that clash with the public interest, but I would think the ability of people to start up new businesses, or the ability of small businesses to survive, would be closer. That's one of the things the Chamber cares about. That's closer to the public interest than the public employee unions, I think. You probably know more about the public employee unions, being a Californian.
Well, the thing is, the general critique, and it's one that I share, is that they've been using government, especially on the state and local level, as an ATM machine, for feather bedding pensions, making sure that salaries are boosted annually, over COLA. They've only now just really begun starting to actually fire a few people, or letting a few people retire without replacing them on state and local level. But for the most part, in the last 10 years, they have just made government so much more expensive. That's a point that it's strange to me that it's taken so long to catch on. People, I think, are focused in the general public at large on stuff like the pension catastrophe. We're spending on public pensions on every level. We're having to contribute 2 and 3 times more out of the annual, let's say, state budget in New York or New Jersey or California than we were even 5 years ago. And the unfunded obligations out there are, they start ranging from something like $500 billion. That's just money that isn't there. It's already promised with these defined benefits, all this kind of stuff. People are cluing in. There's been a lot of big media reports. USA Today follows this pretty closely, and a lot of different newspapers. But a concept that I have had a hard time getting stick, and I just blame myself, is that there are very few places in American life where you can actually have a zero-sum economic argument. People, the French people is a great example. As you know, I'm married to one, and you see these huge public demonstrations. The French believe that there is a single pie of work. It is this size. It's not going to move, and so we need to sort of split it up perfectly. So let's have a 35-hour work week, because then there'll be more hours for other people to work, so we'll have more jobs. The zero sum is just hardwired in. So I make the argument of we actually do have a zero sum, and that is the amount of money that we have in a state budget, in a city budget, in a county budget. And if you look at that pie, the amount taken up for pensions and for salaries and all that kind of stuff just sort of swallows the whole thing up, to the point that you wake up and Chris Christie is saying we can't afford this $3 billion tunnel, and everyone is outraged at what a meanie he is. And the way I bring it back to my friends in California and elsewhere is like, look, why is it that we're paying twice as much for government on the state level than we did 8 years ago? Are we getting twice as better service? No. I mean, clearly that whole game has been rigged in such a way where, unlike everywhere else in American life, the provision, the costs of production have gone way up, where the quality of delivery is flat or below. And if I was them, I'd be getting pissed off at the unions right now. I mean, I would be getting pissed off if I had a big government agenda, and I don't. But if I wanted to build that tunnel under there, I would be looking around and saying, what is making government more expensive right now? Let's go after that. And I think you begin to see this in places like New Jersey and very, very belatedly California, where people say, look, we're going to have to renegotiate these contracts because we're not going to be able to have our more cherished liberal or kind of, enthusiastic government's role out there if we make all this stuff more expensive. So it
was a conversation I had with Tom Coburn shortly after Obama was sworn in. And Coburn at the time was either naively or sort of prudently speaking very highly of Obama. And I think they'd gotten along and sort of had a decent relationship in the Senate. Coburn is maybe the second most conservative member of the Senate now. And he said that he and Obama, as senators, agreed that there should be a real attempt to go after government waste. And the way Coburn put it is, first we try to get rid of the waste, and then we have a big fight over tax cuts or spending hikes, where it would be nice if the left and the right, if libertarians together with good government people of all stripes could get together and say, look, we clearly are overpaying these workers, or we're punting it down the road on pensions, together with pork and other areas where people can agree, we're not really getting results for the public, but we are for well-connected special interests. If we could agree on fighting that, and then later on say, okay, well, we're freeing up X amount of dollars, let's fight over what happens with that. But we don't get there.
And the reason that we don't is that, let's assume for the moment that Coburn's initial take on Obama was right. It's more refreshing for at least a half a second to pretend that Obama was heart and mind, we were in the right place. He, as a candidate, he would say things like, you know what, the kind of school reform that I like is the kind that Michelle Rhee is doing in Washington, D.C. And someone would ask him, well, what about the voucher program there? And he would say, let's wait until we hear about the science. And then, I'll go where the science leads me. And you saw him just this past weekend. He still holds on to the science thing. He thinks that the midterm drubbing his party is about to receive is because Americans are gripped with fear so much that they're not letting facts and science and history guide their judgments. But what happens in practicality? Well, you sign an omnibus spending bill in early 2009, which absolutely gratuitously kills the voucher program in D.C., just as the science is coming in that, it works pretty well. And he gets great credit from the David Brookses of the world as being this great, education reformer. But if you actually look, and this is what political pundits almost never do, and try to measure stuff, how much money is actually being spent over here and all that stuff on political reform, you can have great rhetoric on this, and Obama occasionally has decent rhetoric on it. But he's doubled the amount that we spend federally on education in a very short time and had bailed them out twice. Meanwhile, he's got a very small program of $4 billion called Race to the Top, that comparatively is just peanuts. It's something like 20 to 1, the amount of spending that's been on the status quo versus anything like reform, and he still gets credit for this. The reality is that there are powerful forces, there are special interests, there's an architecture to make sure that these outcomes, which I think are outcomes that are bad for Americans and good public policy, keep happening despite anyone's intentions here and there. And my impression is that he doesn't understand that people can smell that and taste that, and that's part of the reason why he's being refudiated at the polls.
And I think the media miss a lot of it. Ann Coulter, I remember making a point in 2001.
Wait, Ann Coulter made a point?
Ann Coulter makes a lot of good points. She says writes a lot of silly stuff, but she makes a lot of good points. And one of them was, what was compassionate conservatism? And in retrospect, I think she was putting an overly positive spin on it, but she said maybe compassionate conservatism was a case of Bush just saying, look, I'm going to be a conservative, but I'm going to be nice, and that the media sort of believed it. And it got me thinking that for most journalists who are covering politics, they spend more time listening to presidential speeches than they do actually looking, as you were saying, at records, at what people do. So you read all these news stories that begin with leads of Barack Obama is waging a war against a special interest, but Google and he are very friendly. Barack Obama hates lobbyists, but the drug lobby and he helped write this bill together. And they keep finding these exceptions to what they think is Obama's actual agenda or attitude towards special interests, but really they're finding stuff that conflicts with his rhetoric, which is a way of saying he's a misleading politician. And you see it with, I think, Obama and schools. My favorite, though, was Obama and food, where you had some liberal bloggers get very excited because Obama made a reference to Michael Pollan.
Right.
I think he was the guy who wrote Omnivore's Dilemma, and then proceeded to put a Monsanto lobbyist as a head of food safety. And, of course, he's pushing these sort of one-size-fits-all food regulations that would hurt small farming, organic. I don't know all the details on that, but the sort of, big government, one-size-fits-all stuff that helps big business that I love writing about. And there are all these people disillusioned because these were bloggers like Ezra Klein who were following actually policy, but they originally were following his rhetoric, and they thought he was going to be some guy to, care about the Omnivore's Dilemma stuff, simply because he said he was. And it's amazing to me. And I think Republicans, to some extent, can get credit for this if they say something is what they're about. People kind of believe them. But certainly Obama, the media just still largely judge him, believe that his disposition is what he says his disposition is, whether it's towards special interests or school reform.
Well, I think you find the same thing with Republicans and media treatment of them, and even Obama's very cartoonish treatment of them. I unfortunately go to whitehouse.gov and read his speeches all the time, and they infuriate me, not necessarily because I disagree with his policies, but the way that he portrays his own opposition. And he will say things that you will also hear from kind of a less attentive political reporter or just a friend, that, Republicans for 8 years, they slashed, spending on education, and their basic philosophy was to deregulate everything. And we've seen where we got in a ditch and there were Slurpees and oh my God. There's still this idea, and I just have a hard time figuring out where it comes from, that Republicans are reliably deregulatory, reliably, limited government and all that, when we haven't seen any evidence of that at all.
I guess you're giving the example of the media taking Republicans at their word.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I'm sure it drives you nuts because you wrote a book called Obamonomics, and it certainly drives me nuts having written a book called McCain, the Myth of the Maverick. You still, to this day, get the stories after his just cartoonish run of his own in Arizona against J.D. Hayworth, where people are saying, you know what, maybe he just wasn't as much of a maverick as we thought he was. And it's like, really? 13 years later, we're still talking about this? It's a certain testament to the power of branding, and kind of mythology. But a thing that interests me pretty strongly these days, because I see it in a lot of different areas, and it's something that Obama did even more than McCain did in 2000. I think McCain kind of didn't do this in 2008. But proclaim yourself to be a post-partisan, non-ideological person. I'm just a pragmatist. I'm just going to go where the science takes me, and where the good people are going to get together in a room. We're going to knock heads, and Paul Volcker, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And we're going to come out.
The David Brooks dream.
The David Brooks dream of super competent, super patriotic men, usually, who get together and do the right thing for the country and act adult and responsibly. And more and more, this is how you need, or people think that you need, to get elected. And people really, really bought into that. And I think it says something about the kind of naivete Americans, and libertarians included. I mean, there's a lot of people. I went back recently and looked through all the kind of libertarians for Obama coverage that you saw in 2008. David Friedman, the grandson of Milton, or son of Milton, sorry, David, was there, and there's a couple of staffers in the magazine, although I wouldn't describe them as enthusiastic. But there are people making a positive case for it, and it was all this kind of transitive property of, well, he talks about being a pragmatist and solving problems, and I think Austin Goolsbee went to the University of Chicago, and so therefore we can expect and hope X. And it's incredibly naive, and McCain is the same way. You would have people. I mean, his record is just voluminous on a lot of important things that are important to the type of sort of independent-y, mavericky people that were attracted to him. And they would, I would hear total progressives say, well, McCain is more likely to, withdraw from Iraq and pull a Nixon in China. Jesus Christ!
Well,
don't make me do that for you.
On the Libertarians for Obama, I've talked about it on Blogging Heads before. I've talked about it a lot at Reason events and with other libertarian friends I have. And their fallback card, which sort of stumps me though, is they said, well, it was a choice between Obama and McCain, and I thought McCain would have been worse. And I'm not as I'm ideologically also a conservative, so the pro-life thing for McCain kind of mattered to. But in any event, I still can't say President McCain would have been better than Obama, even though I think Obama's been an absolute disaster in so many ways. So I want to ask you, author of Myth of the Maverick, would a McCain presidency have been worse than what we have so far?
It would have been a lot more similar, I think, than people realize. There was the latest one of these articles was in Vanity Fair, a guy, Todd Perdum, I pronounced his name wrongly, but he had a paragraph in there that I blogged about that sort of like imagined what would have been like if we would have had McCain, and his thesis was, well, there would have been no stimulus, we wouldn't have bailed out GM, the economy would be much, much worse. This and that, and a lot of that, I think, and there wouldn't be any movement on healthcare, and there wouldn't have been any financial regulation. Almost all of that is a gross misreading, I think. I mean, McCain, remember, flew back. He tried to cancel one of the debates. I think it was the last one, to come back and showily, vote on in favor of TARP, and be debriefed with the president. Although I think he nodded off during the debriefing. He has, his hero Teddy Roosevelt was always talking about the malefactors of great wealth, and McCain has made similar noises over the years. He's very much in this mold that you see a lot on editorial boards and elsewhere, where you don't necessarily have an exact kind of philosophy or ideology. You just see the problem, must fix the problem with hammer.
And who the bad guys are. I think that really matters with McCain.
Yeah, his whole politics is identifying bad guys and making it a personal kind of a struggle over honor. And so his first instinct was to fire the head of the SEC during the financial crisis. And, probably, I guess I'm all in favor of firing people whenever possible. But, is that really is it because we didn't have a good enough regulator in the right position that the shithouse went up in flames? I kind of don't think so. There was a whole lot of other factors, most of which were beyond his grasp. So I think we would have seen some kind of stimulus. We definitely would have seen some kind of financial regulation. I don't know if with a Democratic majority he could have done anything, or what exactly he would have done on health care. He has been a pretty consistent free trader and pretty consistent critic of expansion of entitlements, including Medicare, in 2003. So I don't think that we would have seen something like Obamacare for sure. Mm-hmm. And the deal breaker for me, and I said as much often, would have been his foreign policy. I mean, he just has a super itchy trigger finger, and he's always looking to have these kind of confrontational moments. And I think we would be escalating all kinds of things with Iran, especially right now. But I mean, even if Vladimir Putin sneezed loudly, we'd be on the threshold of something. And I think that after 10, plus years of this type of presidential foreign policy, executive power, American overstretch. That, to me, was the most dangerous thing about a McCain presidency more than anything. And so,
yeah, and I agree that was what concerned me the most was because at first I said it doesn't matter because Obama will be just like Bush on foreign policy. And I'm not enough of a foreign policy expert. I don't follow it closely enough, but I kind of feel like, especially talking to some of my disillusioned liberal friends, Obama has been a lot like Bush on foreign policy. But your point is McCain might have been a lot worse than Bush or Obama.
He's just, he is the most expansionist, the most interventionist candidate I think we might have had for president, perhaps in our lifetimes. He's the guy who authored the doctrine of rogue state rollback, which is, if there is a nasty dictator anywhere, our explicit policy should be to overthrow him. And so that means supporting the rebels by any means is kind of, possible. And then if they get cracked down on, then we supply them with help with guns. And I mean, he talked about that phrase quite a bit less in 2008 than he did in 2000. But that's the whole tradition that he comes from. He's a Navy man. For a century, his family has been making this part of their whole thing. And then he had his politics sort of seared in the kind of post-Vietnam experience, and he wants to restore our honor out there. But anyways, he's done, is spent as a political force now. And I think it's interesting to watch as Republicans rebrand themselves in a variety of ways that they absolutely were not under Bush. I think the kind of skepticism about nation building is back a little bit, just as is a lot of skepticism in general about the size and growth of government, which is something you didn't hear a hell of a lot about between 2000 and 2008. I don't trust any of it as far as I could kick it, but what's your take on it?
No, I agree that, and I've written a couple columns about the K Street wing of the Republican Party. And the Tea Party wing, and that the K Street wing includes all the former leaders who have now become lobbyists, and that's Bob Dole, Trent Lott are the most conspicuous of those. And Trent Lott saying, last thing we need is a bunch of Jim DeMint showing up and running around the Senate.
Oh, really?
And he says, this sounds like I'm mocking him, but he said, we need to co-opt these guys as soon as they get here. That's literally what Trent Lott, now a lobbyist, former Republican majority leader in the Senate, said. And so Jim DeMint is, in my view, the most conservative senator, most free market, limited government, anti-tax, anti-spending guy. I think judging by voting record and legislative record broadly, libertarians and conservatives would agree that he's at least among the top of lawmakers. And but he also sort of is a thorn in the side of the Republican leadership. Mitch McConnell and Jim DeMint do not get along. But a lot of these guys coming in this year, if they win, they'll be much closer. They'll be allies of DeMint, where DeMint picked the underdog in Kentucky, going with Rand Paul, and a few other races too, including Marco Rubio down in Florida, while the establishment went with a more liberal, more moderate Republican who ended up losing, whether it's Trey Grayson or Charlie Crist. Similar stuff happened in Colorado and Nevada, and of course also in Utah and Alaska. It's not that DeMint went against the incumbent in those states, but he rallied behind the insurgent Joe Miller, Mike Lee, as soon as it won. And similar with backing Pat Toomey against Specter before Specter left the party. And so you will have this sort of little rump, possibly, of anywhere from 3 to 7 guys, including DeMint, who will be defiant, at least for now, unless they get co-opted coming in. And then you'll have a bunch of other people who are conservative and settled in there. But then you'll have an establishment of the Republican Party, which isn't liberal or anti-conservative or pro-big government by ideology, but they're that way because they sort of play the game. And so that'll be the big question for me. If I would like to see the leadership of the Republican parties turn over. Again, I think Boehner and McConnell are fine guys in a lot of ways, but if they're really going to change the way they did it from before, I would like there to be a litmus test. If you supported TARP, you can't run the party. That's sort of would be my dream Republican Party would be.
So Paul Ryan is out.
Yeah, Paul Ryan, who wrote a great column a year ago called "Down with Big Business," but in it he made an excuse for voting for the TARP, and Eric Cantor too. So some conservatives sort of have this dream that Cantor and Ryan are going to overthrow John Boehner. Again, and Boehner's not a liberal Republican either. But I don't have a name off the top of my head, but I'd like to to find some anti-TARP guys to come in. And I'd like guys like Ryan to say, instead of, well, that was an extraordinary circumstance and Obama shouldn't expand it, to say, you know what, it was a mistake. I mean, did nobody say Gulf of Tonkin was a mistake? Or did they all just say, oh, well, we didn't expect the president to carry it? Guess what? You gave the guy the keys. You can't complain too much about what he did when he took it off.
Yeah. I watched this kind of Tea Party insurgency within the Republican Party with great interest as someone who is, I want to see government restraint. We spend a lot of time here at Reason trying to come up with ways to slash the government, and I'm showing a magazine cover now. I think that is the issue of our times right now. So I'm happy when people who run on that issue and evince a seriousness about that issue are either, and especially if they're coming from outside the normal, well-worn paths of politics. I find that to be interesting. A couple of things that I'm more, let's say, concerned about or skeptical about. One is the country has already forgotten, I think, the pledge to America. Has the enthusiasm finally left the building? Does the National Review finally cash that check? Just kidding, National Review, sort of. No, I mean, like, the difference between the pledge to America and the contract from America, which was the kind of Tea Party emanated document, is stunning to me. The Tea Party thing was 10 points. I think all of them are one sentence, and most of them have to do with, cut the government. Cut it. Time to go. And the Republican document, which is this terrible PDF file that takes forever to load on your computer because of all the Ronald Reagan porn in it, is just this meandering whatever the hell, and there's almost no substantive discussion of cuts or even entitlement reform. They're going to make sure to preserve Medicare, and it's just the same old crap. It throws a lot of, or at least a fair amount of social conservative stuff in there, which is absolutely absent from the Tea Party, at least 10 points agenda of what their expressed interest is in right now. And I know you would, love all that social con crap, but I just think after, I can still see Terry Schiavo's twitching body in my mind's eye as the kind of shining example of how unprincipled Republicans got once they became in power. And anyone, in my view, and feel free to yell at me, who thinks that any of that is the most pressing issue in the country right now. And I will make an exception for people who are super principled on the abortion question, because if it's murder, it's murder, and that's kind of a big deal, even though I disagree. But, if people are going after filth on television, if people are really worried about Heather's two mommies, which Rand Paul brought up in his in the campaign in Kentucky, just give it a rest already. We have an issue right now, and it's interesting to me that the Tea Party tendency, which again I'm pretty excited about, and I think you wrote a piece like this, saying that basically there is a thread of social conservatism through all of that, and that's that may make you happy, but it gives me the vapors.
Well, and. Yeah, and I think it should be a point where you feel uncomfortable, because I think that politically we haven't been able to have, and I think you and I traded emails about this, we haven't had politicians recently who were pro-choice or socially liberal and also seemed to believe really in limited government. Yes, a lot of the pro-life, socially conservative Republicans also, abandon, sell out on the limited government stuff. But the fact of the matter is, I looked at who were the top two guys from in the Senate and the House for the National Taxpayers Union. I just used that, and I bet if you use other measures, you'd find the same thing. It was Jim DeMint and Tom Coburn, and it was Ron Paul and Jeff Flake. All four of them have 100% voting records from National Right to Life. Now, if you go further down issues that a lot of social conservatives care about, a lot of them care about drug legalization. It's an issue where I'm more libertarian, though I don't care a lot about it. Then maybe Flake disagrees with the social conservatives. If you talk about gay marriage, you have more ambiguity. But at least on the abortion issue, and I think you're right that, again, there's an ontological question here, right? That is this unborn person a person or not? And that if it is, there's nothing unlibertarian about wanting the state to protect them, because we believe that the state has I think we all believe the state has a role in protecting innocent people from innocent and vulnerable people from the use of force. But the fact of the matter is that when it comes to politicians, the most free market people are also social conservatives. Now, that doesn't mean that the two necessarily go together, but I do think there is a philosophical similarity. And you just look at the way Milton Friedman talks about free market, or we get people talking about the fatal conceit and the invisible hand. These things are a sort of philosophical conservatism of an idea. This resistance to central planning is, I would put it, an acknowledgement of man's fallen nature. Now, you can put that in secular terms too, but still also come to some conservative conclusions. And those play into an idea of, well, maybe tradition and family and community have a value, and we shouldn't try to just, create our lives and our family arrangements and our community arrangements completely from scratch. We shouldn't try to clone ourselves, and we shouldn't try to, put our brains in the internet or live forever. Because
we shouldn't try to live forever? You've given up, Carney.
I think a lot of social conservatism, and again, that word can mean a lot, but for a sort of traditionalist Catholic like me, a lot of it has the same philosophical roots as a belief in limited government, and it has to do with the fact that we're imperfect creatures who make errors, and that keeping us from having too much power over everybody or keeping us from changing our lifestyles radically is a prudent undertaking.
Yeah, I just when we're talking about government policy and the phrase "keeping us from," that's when the hair on the back of my neck stands up, and I don't want the government to keep Heather's two mommies from marrying.
But the government is. I'm in Montgomery County now. The government is trying to feed Heather's two mommies to my kids through the government-run public schools. So that's, again, this is another point of fusion. I would never push anything that would in any way restrict the freedom of gay couples, of people to marry and do what they want. But I also don't want the schools trying to redefine family for me. Luckily, I can probably borrow enough money to send my kids to Catholic school and be able to avoid that. But for me, those issues, a lot of these social issues regarding family, are about a laissez-faire position on me. Let me raise my family as I want to raise my family.
Yeah, it's the theological analogy is pretty interesting to me. I just feel like, we have traded emails on this topic, and it's uncomfortable for me because, I've always wanted, the Arnold Schwarzenegger kind of great hope for fiscal conservatism and social, tolerance out there. And for the most part, that model collapsed. Now, Tim Kavanaugh has been plumping this idea that Schwarzenegger's getting a bum rap, that he's actually he's made Chris Christie possible by really taking on the public pensions in California. I think they just signed a deal last week on that. And so maybe there is some final hope that he sort of popularized the idea of we need to take care of these long-term problems. And he also signed, which actually surprised me, an almost decriminalization bill that changes pot possession, simple pot possession, into basically a traffic ticket, an infraction where it doesn't show up on your criminal record, which is a good thing. It's not nearly as good as legalization, which is on the ballot there, which he said would make California a laughing stock, on which he has the consensus of every single newspaper in the state of California, with the exception of the Orange County Register and Dianne Feinstein and Jerry Brown and everybody else. So maybe he's not out of step with at least the political class there. But it is an uncomfortable thing for me because I don't like applied social conservatism in public policy. If anything, in most cases, I despise it, and it makes my tummy feel bad. I just don't think that I don't want the government getting involved in intimate decisions. Period. Stay away from it. Tell me about what you're going to do with the limited amount of money that you're stealing from us. And
well, do you feel the same way about the government? Using big government to advance social liberalism? The photographer in, what was it, in New Mexico, where they don't even have gay marriage, who was ended up being fined by some human rights council because he refused to shoot a gay marriage because it was a gay marriage.
You just blew my mind. That sounds insane. No, I don't like that either. You know, you should be able to opt out, for crying out loud, and be able to form your own communities doing what you want to do.
But I think a lot of libertarians side with the social left, and it's fine, you know, to side with them on what you're doing at night while I'm home with my kids. You guys go do your social libertarian thing.
What is that thing, do you think?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to find out.
So we get together with Christine O'Donnell and light up the fires and start masturbating.
But then when it comes to policy, I think there should be sort of as much there's as much of a threat of sort of liberal big government sort of social engineering as there is of conservative. And a part of it is I don't live in Alabama, and I'm sure I would say something different if I lived in the South. But having come from sort of liberal suburban New York and New York State public schools and now living in Montgomery County, I'm thinking that the main thing at stake in the culture wars is the government interfering with my ability to raise my family, you know, as good Irish conservative Catholics. And,
so it's a public school thing for you mostly, or are there other...
a public school thing, and, you know, just look at discrimination laws. What if, as a landlord, I wanted to demand that my tenants were married? That's illegal in D.C. I don't know if that's illegal in Montgomery County, but I would be surprised if it isn't.
In D.C., you can't ask whether they're you can't get close to asking whether they're gay or not. We had this, which we found out an interesting way. We were shopping for an apartment, I guess a couple of years ago now, and we would ask the door guy or whoever showing the place. So what kind of people live here? You know, our way of saying, is it diverse? Maybe there's some gay couples or whatever, because we wanted to live in a diverse place. And it's great because they can't tell you and they freak out. You know, they're like, people live here, and they start like sweating and they're looking at their watch. And it was only, we have some real estate agents who come through a lot of reason things out there. And I should just say, hi, Bruce Majors. There you are. And so we learn all the ins and outs of this kind of ridiculous, protection gone wild on the free flow of information.
And if a landlord prefers gay tenants because the stereotype is they take better care of the property, he should be allowed to do that, and he wouldn't be allowed to. So, I mean, it's one of my goals, and I did talk to your colleague Peter Suderman about this a few years back, of sort of encouraging more social conservatives to start realizing that government is not going to be their friend, that Lynn Cheney wants to draft this curriculum for history to make sure everybody, knows American history, and it ends up getting taken over by the National Endowment for the Humanities, and it's this PC, I don't know if you remember this from...
I thankfully blanked it out.
90 to 93, Lynn Cheney started this, suggested curriculum nationally when she was in the Bush administration, the first one. And then by the time the Clinton administration turned out the final product, it was this politically correct laughing stock. And that, to me, is just a great example of telling social conservatives, government is not going to be your friend. And if you believe in the power of a local community and a family and your church, you shouldn't need government to be propping you up in a lot of ways, besides basically, protecting your freedoms to the degree that that's its role. And then telling libertarians, guys, don't hate on the social conservatives so much. We're not, we can be, pro-life and go to church and have moral judgments about what other people do without necessarily being a threat to liberty. And I think there's sometimes a blurring of a line between if I say, you know what, it's wrong for X to happen, that doesn't make me unlibertarian. As long as I say, but fine, go ahead and do it. I mean, I don't think people should do hard drugs. If anybody asked me, should I do hard drugs, I would say no. But that doesn't make me unlibertarian. I actually am not that big a fan of pot smoking. In college, I saw it turn some of the more creative people more stupid. So I sort of disapprove of that. I'm not going to say it's immoral because tons of my friends.
What's the favorite record that you ever listened to stoned?
I'll tell you my favorite record I've listened to. Drinking lots of whiskey. It's, the Pogues, Shane MacGowan, the Pogues' greatest hit.
What a shocker, Carney! I would have never guessed that. That and the bagpipe porn that you have in your basement. Look,
bagpipes are Scottish.
Whatever, it's all the same to me. I appreciate your kumbaya, and I don't mean that as sneeringly as it sounded.
Can't we all just get along?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're going to be flying under the libertarian banner, and I really wouldn't recommend that for anyone to begin with, but you reserve the right to hate everybody. That's at least the small amelioration you get, and certainly the major apparitions of political parties, which are just competing to take your money to screw you over and to reward their friends. And that's always going to be my basic position. And it's going to take a hell of a lot more than, a rump caucus of 4 senators in a GOP run by John freaking Boehner and Mitch McConnell to make me think that they are going to give 2 shits about limited government in any scope of the word, and people who are going to get excited about some new federal program to teach us about the great men of history or something like that. I mean, it shows me that there is a lack of philosophical mooring, and I think this is a huge reason why we do have a Tea Party thing going on right now. It's just the whole concept. I mean, it's not a majoritarian thing in American history, but there's definitely an identifiable strain, and you don't have to groan and strain to find it in American politics of people who just kind of think that which governs best governs least. It's not a crazy idea, and it has gone totally unrepresented in policy, politics, and governance for a really long time. And so I'm happy to see that coming up, and I'm really happy to see that being stressed more on the grassroots level even than on the top level, because it suggests to me that if the new crop of people who come in and who benefit from the pendulum swinging the other direction, if they go back to K Street Project type of politics, maybe they're going to lose out on this block. I mean, maybe that is a restive group of people out there, but I would be even more optimistic about it than I actually am if I wasn't hearing from some of these candidates trying to win an election by acting like Carl Palladino up in New York or making Heather's Two Mommies cracks. I mean, just knock it off. It's 2010. We have other pressing business, and it's sort of depressing to me that people feel like they need to win campaigns throwing out these sort of bombshell kind of, dog whistle, mix your own metaphors, type of things out there. It's just, it's distressing. It reminds me of why I'm never going to have a home and no one will want me to invite me in it anyways. It's just, it's going to be a while till we have more than 1 or 2 politicians out there, like a Gary Johnson type figure who is legitimately interested in the removal or the paring down of government in every sense of the word, and not just fiscal.
Yeah, and I'll tell you sort of my positive note, since we're both mostly negative notes, but you just did hit a positive one earlier. What I'm happy about, and I'll get depressed about it as it manifests itself with a Republican House majority, though, but what I'm happy about as far as the rhetoric goes these days is the degree to which the Wall Street bailout was a huge spur in getting the Tea Party energy going. And that when I've gone to a couple Tea Parties or just gone out to congressional districts and talked to people, that they they're not sounding the line that some conservative opinion pages do about Obama being too anti-business. A lot of the Tea Party types are themselves really pissed off at the Bank of America's and Pfizer's and Goldman Sachs and General Motors and Chrysler's, as well as not just the unions too, who are taking their money. And I'd be hopeful that, especially because I believe it'll still hold up by the end of the election, that Democrats will have, for the third straight cycle, gotten more money from these big industries. I'm hoping that just that fact will piss off the Republicans enough that they'll be willing to do what they haven't done to date, which is throw big business overboard when big business is going against the ideas the Republicans articulate, which have to do with limited government. Abandoning bailouts, abandoning special favors, abandoning the subsidies. And I think that there's be a political reason to do this. I don't normally think that my views, what I think is best policy, is that winning of a political issue. But I think that on a lot of these cases, going after corporate welfare, the Republicans are in a prime position to do that, of making the Democrats, making Obama stick up for ethanol subsidies and TARP and all these other things. So there's some inkling of hope in my mind that because a lot of these Tea Party guys have a bit of a populist libertarianism to them, that the GOP could be a little bit of the populist libertarian as well.
I'll grant you that inkling of hope and weather it with the outrageous to me fact that some of the biggest opposition to Obama actually cutting and reforming NASA in a positive, sensible direction has come from Republicans like John Cronin, however you pronounce his name. I mean, Jesus Christ, we're talking about like $3 billion a year, and we've got to protect that because there might be 12 jobs.
And the Republicans' role in healthcare debate was mostly killing the public option, which was a really bad thing, but it was one of the few places where the insurers and the drug companies were both pro-free market, and the Republicans made that their number one issue. And then and without talking about the individual mandate very much, and then after that, they went after they attacked the demagogued on the Medicare cuts.
And on ag subsidies, I wrote in my column for the recent issue, I think Obama was, proposed trimming agricultural subsidies by less than $1 billion, and he got an angry letter from like 9 GOP senators. Like, oh, you're sending the wrong signal to the American farmer. Here's our deal, right? Any Republican from now on, especially the Tea Party, anyone, if you use any phrase, the following phrase, the American farmer, that's it, right? No more votes for you. If you use small business as the backbone of America, as some kind of new SAPA to create SBA, you're gone, done. Just stop it. It's bullshit. I mean, it's enough already. Like you see on every level. And I said something nice about Schwarzenegger, so let's recant all of that. He just came back from China, talking like the Californians. It's like they're crack. They just go to Shanghai and come back, and they sound like Tom freaking Friedman. If only we could just do things like they did in Shanghai. And now Schwarzenegger wants to have a World's Fair in California in 2020, where we can have our bullet train to the stars. Bring all 12 people who are going to go look at it. I mean, day after day, you see absolute tangible evidence that these people aren't serious. They don't feel the problem at hand. They don't recognize, as Obama himself will say, or Bernanke has said on several occasions, that we are literally on an unsustainable path. Something has to break. Or else it's going to go up in flames. It's really that bad right now. So I have zero tolerance for people who are going to, raise objections at the most modest symbolic of cuts anywhere, especially if they're Republicans and pretending to run on a limited government campaign.
I think your prophecy of doom is a good note on which we should end.
Sorry to bum everybody out. Quickly, the Jonathan Chait bet: will Republicans, once they take over Congress, will they move to impeach Barack Hussein Obama the 12th?
No, that's ridiculous. They won't. There will be hearings. There are ethics abuses Obama has done. I've talked to Darrell Iss's staff about some of the abuses of the government records laws, how they're using, off government emails and setting up meetings explicitly to avoid having records. So these are ethics abuses that deserve real investigations. Will Republicans do some investigations that are silly? Sure, but there won't be an impeachment. I'll take that bet.
All right, and I will bet this to the world at large. On November 2nd, California is going to legalize marijuana, and the world is going to flip upside down when that happens, and I can't freaking wait. On that note, goodbye the world. Thanks, Tim. This is fun.
Thank you.
And let's have some whiskey soon.
Sounds good.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.